Good afternoon, good evening to everybody who's joining us. I know we've got a lot of people coming from the Asia Pacific region, and that's really great to see you here. My name is Mike Albu. I am responsible for the Beam Exchange, a platform for information and knowledge sharing about market systems development. And these webinars, these Grab the Mic webinars, are our platform for programs to share their learning, their insights and their experience from applying market systems development approach. So you're very welcome. Today, I'm delighted to say we have three speakers from the Market Development Facility, which is a big cross multi-country program funded by the Australian government mainly. And these speakers are going to be talking about climate change, evolution in market systems development, and the lessons that they've learned from trying to make climate a high priority in their program. So we have Angus Towart, who's the climate change manager for MDF based in Fiji. We have Nadhia Najeeb from a business advisor for MDF in Sri Lanka, and Nimesha Palliyaguru also from Sri Lanka, who's also a business advisor there. Before I hand over to Angus to introduce the presentation, I should explain that they're going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then, or less, I hope, we will have plenty of time for questions and answers. And if you have questions for the speakers, please do not put them in the chat. Put them in the Q&A box. So you'll see a button that says Q&A down the bottom, hopefully, of your screen. Put your questions there, and then the speakers can directly find them quickly. And we'll have that bit of the conversation in about half an hour. Otherwise, yeah, I think that's enough from me, and I would love to hand you over to Angus Towart. Angus.
Thanks very much, Mike. And yeah, thanks for having us. So yeah, as Mike said, myself, Nadhia, and Nimesha are from the Market Development Facility. We were just going to talk a little bit today about how we have, over the past kind of 3 years, grappled with integrating climate change into an existing MSD program. And then Nadhia and Nimesha are going to share some examples of how we have done that, particularly in the agriculture and tourism sectors in Sri Lanka. So yeah, just to start off with a very quick introduction for those that aren't familiar. So MDF, Market Development Facility, is an Australian government-funded multi-country program, sector agnostic, and currently active in Sri Lanka, Timor-Leste, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, and Vanuatu. We have a large portfolio, mainly consisting of interventions in agriculture, tourism, and urban industries, which we call it, but that's mostly an outsourcing portfolio in Fiji. We've also more recently been exploring green energy, but probably really important to say that we weren't kind of designed as a climate change program. We really are an economic development program. But we had a climate change objective added to the contract in the most recent phase, so 2022 to 2027. And really from a low base, we've now moved over that 3 years to 50% of our budget being eligible for climate finance. So when we think about climate change and market systems, obviously this was something that our donor felt very strongly about. But I just wanted to make the point that it's not only our donors who this is important for. I think when markets are changing in response to climate change, businesses are making voluntary commitments to reduce emissions. Governments are introducing regulations. There are new technologies emerging. Consumers are changing the way they behave, and that all has an impact.
Oh dear, we seem to have lost Angus's connection. Sorry about that. Let's hope he can reconnect. Can someone remind me who's presenting the? Is Angus presenting the slides? Okay. Well, I may have to, Isabel, can you share the slides and maybe we can move on to the next speaker while Angus tries to reconnect?
Okay, give me a minute.
So yes, I know Angus was going to give a brief overview of MDF, and he's got halfway through that, but I'm sure it won't be too disruptive if we go straight to the next speaker, which I believe. Oh, Angus, are you back?
Sorry, I'm not sure what happened. I dropped out at exactly the wrong time. Where
Okay.
was I? Sorry?
You were on slide number 4, I think.
Okay. Sorry about that,
That's all right.
everyone.
Great.
Connection. Did it? Can everyone see my screen?
We're seeing the first slide.
Fantastic. Okay. So I'll just jump to slide 5, just in the interest of keeping it moving.
Yeah.
So when we think about how we are making the business case for climate-related investment, a framework that we've really used at MDF is to really focus on kind of what climate change risks are most relevant for businesses in the sector that we work. So this has really been about kind of getting very explicit at the sector, system, function, and actor levels. What does climate change mean in really practical terms to the businesses that we're speaking to? And then we try, as always, to figure out what the opportunity is to address a specific risk, and which actor might have interest in providing a solution. So always thinking about what are the climate change risks and incentives, opportunities for businesses. So as I said, we try and use this framework to think about kind of the different types of risks that businesses face. Physical risk, obviously, businesses facing more regular losses and damages due to climate-related weather events. But there's also things like price risk, where businesses are unable to source certain raw materials or commodities as a result of climate change. Regulations that are emerging, that compliance has costs and risks. Loss of market access, for example. Reputation, so customers perceiving firms or industries' actions as harmful can have a negative impact on businesses. And liability, the expense of remediation for not making or contributing to climate change. So and then we really try and think about how do we turn these risks into opportunities. So how can we focus on speaking to businesses about turning these risks into opportunities? Physical risk could be things like investments in reducing loss and damage, such as disaster resilient infrastructure. You could be thinking about reputation, responding to new consumer preferences, trying to tap into kind of high value green segments. Diversifying supply chains to respond to climate risk in sole source commodities, for example. Madagascan vanilla is a famous example. As well as building new service offerings, like we will hear the example talk about in a minute. So without further ado, I am going to pass over to my colleague Nadhia to talk about how we have kind of applied this in Sri Lanka agriculture. Nadhia, over to you.
Thanks, Angus. So I'll speak a bit about our work in agriculture, but before that, let me give you some context on the sector in Sri Lanka. So agriculture is a vital part of Sri Lanka's economy and society. It employs around 26% of the national labor force. It contributes about 7 to 8% of GDP, and it remains a key source of livelihood, particularly in rural areas where the sector is dominated by smallholder farmers, and they produce both for domestic consumption as well as for export. So we have about 1.65 million smallholder farmers, and they drive about 80% of the country's food production. So they play a central role in ensuring national food security. But agriculture faces a lot of challenges, including aging population, low productivity, and climate-related disruptions. So what you see here on the screen, these are the main climate risks that affect agricultural productivity. So that's rising temperatures, erratic rainfall, drought and dry condition. And this leads to increased heat stress, higher irrigation demand, reduced labor productivity, faster pest and disease cycles, soil erosion, nutrient leaching. So the list goes on and on. But this leads to a reduction in productivity, both in terms of quantity as well as quality. So this translates to then reduced incomes and rural livelihoods, as well as reduced revenue and cash flow volatility for agribusinesses. And as per the framework that Angus just shared earlier, agriculture is dominated by physical risks, but then those risks lead to price risks due to fluctuations in price and uncertainty in markets, reputational risks if business as usual continues, as firms increasingly look to position themselves as environmentally responsible. And we also have emerging regulation risk, where there have been steps taken to slowly roll out mandatory sustainability reporting, particularly with large companies. So there is a lot of opportunity emerging in trying to address these risks with businesses. And given the array of climate risks, there is opportunity to support farmers with improving productivity on multiple fronts. Next slide, please. So we have worked on a combination of product and technological solutions, as mentioned here on the slide. But for the purpose of today's discussion, I'll focus on high-performing fertilizer. So the reason we've chosen high-performing fertilizer is because productivity has been seriously hampered by the effectiveness of fertilizer. The quality of the fertilizer itself, but also fertilizer effectiveness is reduced with heavy rainfall, with drought, soil erosion, and poor soil health in general. And in Sri Lanka in particular, we have historically over-relied on chemical fertilizer, and the sector has been dependent on imported fertilizers and subsidies given by the government, which have created market distortions and created limited resilience to global shocks. The sector has always depended on government subsidies directed towards traditional chemical fertilizers, which then limit the availability of high-performing products, because what essentially happens is the government directly provides the fertilizer to the farmer, and they have only ever provided traditional chemical fertilizer. So that limits the choice of the farmer on what product that they use. And so this has worsened soil degradation, reduced productivity, and increased nitrogen runoff, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions and water pollution. But then we had an economic crisis, and as bad as that was, it created a lot of opportunities as well. The government declared bankruptcy, and therefore, amidst a lot of other changes, they were forced to switch to a cash-based subsidy. So what this means is that the government transferred cash directly to farmers. So farmers were then able to go to the retail point and pick which fertilizer they want. So this enabled them to make a more informed decision and access more high-performing fertilizer. So now, because of that, there is more incentive from farmers to buy better and higher performing fertilizer, but also from the private sector end, there is more incentive to produce and provide higher performing forms of fertilizer in order to capture market share. So therefore, there is a lot more competition in the market now. And in addition, high-performing fertilizer have much higher profit margins compared to traditional chemical fertilizers. So it's a lot more lucrative and attractive for companies to invest in. For example, limus-treated urea is a product that we're promoting in paddy, and it reduces usage of chemical fertilizer by 60%. It saves costs for farmers, and it increases profitability for the company by 91% compared to the traditional chemical fertilizer. So this created a large opportunity for MTF to work in this area. And so what we're doing here is we're focusing on the three functions mentioned here: production, distribution, and retail, and information and extension, in order to improve availability and accessibility of the product, which then leads to improvements in productivity. So what we did, we identified a range of companies, small and big, and we're working with 6 to 7 of the main players of the market to ensure scalability. So we supported with production. So we support companies to develop and promote improved fertilizers. So there could be organic, hybrid, slow release, And these fertilizers, they help reduce emissions, particularly of nitrous oxide, which has a higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide. They improve nutrient efficiency, and they're more resilient to climate extremes like drought and heavy rainfall. We co-invested in machinery for local production and value addition, but we also, I think the bulk of our work has been in distribution and retail and information extension, where we've helped expand distribution and retail networks to reach smallholder farmers. That includes onboarding more retailers and finding ways to incentivize retailers to push certain types of products. We've facilitated targeted farmer engagement. So some of them include demonstration plots, trainings, provision of samples and discounts, and other forms of tailored marketing mechanisms. We built extension networks to provide technical assistance and build trust and improve information flow in general. So these interventions are already showing a lot of promising results. The companies we're working with cover about 90% of the fertilizer market, so they have a lot of influence over what farmers use. Next slide, please. So we've seen increased sales of improved fertilizer and wider adoption. Our demonstration plots show yield improvements and reduced input costs. We're still in the process of carrying out our overall impact measurement, but early monitoring visits indicate significant reduction in nitrogen-based fertilizer use, resulting in reduction of agricultural emissions in general. Farmer incomes are rising and companies are seeing stronger engagement and trust. And as per current sales data, we estimate that about 12% of paddy farmers have converted to improved forms of fertilizer from the traditional chemical fertilizers. And we're expecting this, given the current trend over the past few seasons, we're expecting this to go up to about 30% in the next 2 years. So this is a little case study, Sri Lanka. They were one of our first partners, and it's a relatively smaller company, but they had a very innovative and effective fertilizer. They needed support to improve their reach and access in general, because they were a small company. They weren't accustomed to working at a larger scale. So we supported them to shift towards targeted engagement. In the first pilot district we worked on, they saw an 8-fold increase in sales volume. Farmers reported significant increase in harvest and income, and over 12,000 farmers were reached in person. We also saw a 37% reduction in the use of phosphorus-based fertilizer, and that's important because the overuse of phosphorus-based fertilizer contributes to soil degradation, and so it's a really important thing to limit in terms of improving productivity. And farmers themselves, they have begun seeing the impact of this. They've observed visibly stronger root systems, longer lasting green foliage, thicker stems and leaves, and more stalks per plant. And so farmers are really beginning to see the value of improved forms of fertilizer. So we have already started to see early signs of systemic change. As I mentioned, 12% of paddy farmers have already converted. Therefore, we're continuing investments in this area, and we're influencing policy and government recommendations to keep this positive trajectory going. So I'll just stop there, and I'll be happy to answer further questions on this, but I'll just hand over to my colleague Nimesha, who will speak a bit about our work in tourism in Sri Lanka.
Thanks, Nadhia. So I will be speaking about climate change in tourism and opportunities, threats, and MDF's work in tourism Sri Lanka. So the Sri Lankan tourism industry is critical. It's one of the important economic sectors for Sri Lanka. It brings in foreign currency, creates jobs, and supports thousands of small businesses. After facing a major financial crisis, like Nadhia mentioned, the government is now focusing on targeting 2.5 million tourists this year, and this will be a strong sign of recovery for Sri Lanka. The industry is also providing employment for around 400,000 jobs, both direct and indirectly. But tourism depends heavily on nature and seasons. The climate change disruptions are really affecting the wildlife patterns, the changing beaches. The beaches are being eroding, and rising temperature and making some places less comfortable for visitors. So this is really creating uncertainty in tourist season and making it harder for businesses to plan and stay stable. So like Angus mentioned, if this continues, we are going to have high reputational risks. And on When discussing other bigger risks like floods, droughts, and cyclones are becoming more severe and damaging the infrastructure. So water and energy costs are also rising, and sea levels are rising and threatening coastal hotels and resorts. On top of that, businesses are now facing new regulations around sustainability and climate reporting, which is becoming mandatory for listed companies in Sri Lanka. However, this threat is also bringing in opportunity. Travelers today are looking for sustainable and meaningful experiences. This is where Sri Lanka can really shine by offering slow travel, nature-based tourism, and eco-friendly products. So, as you can see globally, over 60% of the travelers say that sustainability matters to them, and many actively choose destinations and services that reflect these values. But for businesses in Sri Lanka, it has not been easy because of the shocks that the economy had gone through. Many are still recovering, and they don't really have the resources and clear guidance to invest in sustainability. So this creates a strong opportunity for MDF to really support the industry with sustainable tourism solutions. So some of the areas that we work in are product development, supporting businesses in cost reductions, emission reductions, and supporting them to stay competitive. So speaking a little bit about travel agents in Sri Lanka, the threat for them is bigger because now they're expected by the global clientele to offer carbon calculated itineraries. They are also expected to work closely with their value chains like the hotels, transport providers, and experience operators to gather data and also meet sustainability standards. In terms of hotels, hotels are now trying to track energy use, water consumption, and implement waste management solutions so that they can bring their operating costs down. So this is where MDF has really come in and supported them in building skills and tailored solutions that really support them to achieve their climate goals, at the same time attract travelers who are eco-conscious. So moving on to the next slide. So we'll move on to a couple of examples to understand the work that we've done so far in Sri Lanka tourism. So on the demand side, MDF is supporting players in increasing demand by curating eco-friendly products. So one of the most successful examples being the work with a company called Authenticities, a leading business and a business travel company. So together with Authenticities, we have been able to implement Sri Lanka's first ever carbon calculated tour. So while curating this tour, we have supported Authenticities in measuring the footprint for the entire trip. So the itinerary was designed in a slow travel mode and operated entirely with electric vehicles, which Authenticities invested in, along with fixed infrastructure costs that they invested in. So MDF really supported in curation of the itineraries and provided technical know-how to ensure credibility and impact. So as part of this process, MDF supported Authenticities to develop a sustainability manifesto guide, which is a guiding document that helped navigate the technical complexities and safeguarding the project from greenwashing. Authenticities, which is also a large business-to-business player, has now launched this product. In March, they launched it. And we're happy to say that they've just made their first sale. And this sale is significant because it has brought revenue to Authenticities of USD 17,000, which just for two travelers to travel in Sri Lanka for 21 days. So it's important to note that this is 3 times the average visitor stay in Sri Lanka, which is around 7 days. And the tour was also able to double the pricing that an average tour would bring to Sri Lanka. So having these tours also helps translate the benefits or the revenues to their value chain involved in slow travel and experiences. It's also important to remember that while we were working in this particular project, Authenticities was not the only entity that benefited. So they have 35 suppliers who were part of this project. So Authenticities worked with these 35 entities, of which some of them were MSMEs, and they evaluated these entities, did one-on-one trainings with them, and actually taught them how to do carbon calculations and how to really implement changes to bring their carbon emissions down. So this has now become an year-on-year exercise, and suppliers receive tailored recommendations to improve their properties. So some of the actions that the suppliers or the hotels have taken are they have invested in renewable energy, they have switched to LED lighting, they've implemented water and waste management solutions. So we move to the next case study. So the next one was with a 14 property boutique hotel chain called the Thema Group. So for Thema Group, MDF supported carbon calculations and verifications, making them Sri Lanka's first hotel group to be verified. This led to tangible operational changes, such as solar energy systems were installed, 20 staff members were trained on sustainability, a carbon analyst was hired by the property to drive this project, a group sustainability strategy was also curated, and now they're driving this strategy for year-on-year changes. So with MDF's guidance, they have also been able to use this data for their marketing, and they have basically showcased to the industry that verifications really support in getting that data and marketing their product better. So lastly, we have the National Cleaner Production Center. Next slide. So this intervention was curated with a service provider in the industry. So we designed this to reach broader the tourism industry rather than working with individual players like hotels and travel agents. So with the National Cleaner Production Center, we are working with 10 hotels to develop investment grade sustainability reports. So these reports will cover energy, water, technology, and carbon calculations. These reports will help hotels to make informed decisions and unlock access to green finance for low emission upgrades. So as part of our work with the National Cleaner Production Center, it doesn't really stop at supporting the 10 hotels, but we will also be doing a capacity building for 30 other hotels nationwide on sustainability and on diversity and inclusion. So on that note, I'd like to sum up the work we've done in green tourism in Sri Lanka. So for every dollar that MDF has invested, we've been able to see the private sector contributing 12 times towards sustainable solutions. And our focus on enabling behavioral change has really encouraged companies to invest in fixed assets that support their sustainability goals. So hotels have adopted a range of innovations such as solar panels, waste management systems, electric key cards, electric tuk-tuks, new guest experiences. So by identifying and empowering the right scale agents, we've moved beyond isolated interventions to sector-wide transformation. So on that note, I'd like to pass over to Angus for our last slide for today.
Thanks, Nimesha. Just to, I guess, quickly wrap up, I think, you know, we've seen here kind of two very different examples of climate change risk and opportunity, and how, you know, we've taken an agriculture physical risk and taken turned that into an opportunity for distribution of climate resilience enhancing inputs, technologies, and information. Whereas in tourism, despite, you know, being in the same country, the more salient business risk was around adopting sustainable practices and marketing to an international consumer that was becoming more discerning. So it was much more around sustainable services and embedding that in the industry. So I think kind of some of the key kind of lessons we've seen from trying to integrate climate change across our cycle in the analysis and strategy development, I really focus on being very specific on the types of climate risk and what they mean for your sector. You don't need to be a climate scientist, but you do need to understand how climate change and the market response to climate change are going to impact your partners. And that, I think, then gives you the opportunity to walk in when you speak to businesses and really speak their language, talk about risk mitigation, new markets, productivity, rather than speaking about adaptation and mitigation. And I think you'll just have more success when you do that. And then just quickly on measurement and learning, I think the main thing for me or takeaway that I would share is is to really focus on measuring the thing that you think will promote further uptake. So, you know, Nadhia's example, we're distributing fertilizer to smallholder farmers. Carbon verification and measurement for this type of system is very expensive, might lack an incentive. But talking more about some of the resilience gains and benefits that farmers have got and promoting them through, you know, marketing and distribution does have a replication benefit. So we've kind of more focused in that area. So yeah, thank you so much. And I will just pass back to Mike to facilitate question and answer.
Thank you, Angus. Thank you, Nimesha and Nadhia. Really great presentations. Very interesting cases. Thank you so much. We've got a few questions already coming in, so I'll go over to those in a second. But please, for everyone listening in, if you've got questions, please put them now in the Q&A box, and we'll get a great conversation going. I want to start with questions that are quite technical and specific, and then maybe broaden out into the more broader philosophical and learning questions as we go on through the 30 minutes we have. And thank you very much for keeping to a very good time, you guys. That was great. So look, there's a couple of quite technical questions which are quite useful, Nadhia, which I just want to bring them up. But in a way, before I even ask those, I wanted to ask you a question, which is, listening to your presentation, it sounded in many ways quite familiar. You know, it's the kind of thing that I could imagine many market systems development programs working in agriculture doing over the years. So what, in other words, you know, supporting retailers to improve production, distribution and information about products for farmers is not a new thing at all in MSD. What is different in your view about what MDF are doing, and how has the climate imperative modified or changed what you would perhaps have done anyway in Sri Lanka in fertilizer, for example?
Yes, I mean, I think historically in Sri Lanka, a lot of support has gone towards traditional chemical fertilizers, and a lot of development aid has gone towards directly handing over fertilizer to farmers. We don't have much experience with market systems development type of initiatives in Sri Lanka, so that kind of thinking has not been embedded into the system yet. But with this, we saw an opportunity in two ways, because all of the changes in government and policy really created opportunity for private sector, and we knew that there was this large untapped potential that we've been sitting on. So when all of the other factors lined up, it was a no-brainer to get into it. And companies saw it too. Private sector came in, but they weren't able to execute it in the way that you would hope they would, because they weren't accustomed to working in a free market. They always worked through government channels. So even when the government was providing fertilizer directly to farmers, these companies used to bid for their tenders, and they used to sell to the government. So they didn't have the access and the reach to work directly with retailers to increase demand on certain products with farmers. So they didn't know how to engage as much. And where they didn't have as much experience working with smallholders as much as they did with much larger scale farmers. So I think that's really right where it sets us apart, is where, yes, we identified the market level constraints, but then we also identified each individual company's constraints, what their history has been, what background and experience they come with, what their expertise is, and where are their limitations. So, I mean, we are working with some of the largest companies in fertilizer in Sri Lanka. So you would think that they would know what they're doing, that they would be able to do this without our support. But there are still so many limitations in the way in which they work. They have operational issues. Some of them have supply issues. Some of them, like one of the largest companies, has one of the lowest retail presence in the country. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done on a partner by partner basis, which then feeds to our umbrella objective in improving productivity. So I hope that answers your question, Mike.
It's very informative, yeah. But I think I was particularly trying to pick up on what the climate angle is in that.
Right.
So
Yes. So yeah.
Mallory's question is very relevant here. So, for example, Mallory Schlinger said, "Is there any monitoring or research showing whether fertilizers contribute to improved soil health?" Now, obviously, soil health is that's a relatively new kind of criteria for success, right? So what's interesting is how did you integrate that into the system, the market system? Is it yeah?
Yes, I mean, we don't speak about it much in private sector, so I got so used to ignoring that because that's more of an MDF objective, and we don't normally talk about it when we're speaking to partners. But that's intrinsically part of the intervention itself, because we only promote improved forms of high performing fertilizer, and what that means is they have to be a form of climate adaptation or a mitigation. And so in terms of mitigation, what we're doing is we're reducing the usage of chemical fertilizer. So a lot of these products that we're using, they are chemical fertilizer, but they're more, and some of them are organic as well. Some of them are hybrid, but a lot of them are chemical. But they are high performing fertilizer, so you don't require it in large quantities as much as the traditional chemical fertilizer. So by even reducing that, so some of our preliminary findings show that you can reduce it by about 50%. So if you're reducing nitrogen-based chemical fertilizer by 50%, you're also reducing emissions from it by 50%. So that's the mitigation side of things. And then in terms of adaptation, we are supporting with types of fertilizer that are more drought resistant, that are more resilient to heavy rainfall, that are more resilient to soil erosion. And then there are certain types of fertilizer that help they help stabilize the pH levels. And then in terms of soil biodiversity, we even during our last assessments, we just get qualitative findings. So that we have, in terms of soil health, it's really hard to go into the technical aspects of it in terms of assessing it because we have limited capacity ourselves. But we get the qualitative findings. So we check what the root systems have been like. So farmers are able to tell us where the root systems used to go directly downwards. Now they're spreading a bit more. There are more worms in the soil. And so there are qualitative findings such as that. We've also seen instances of where farmers say that the crop and the soil health has improved to the point where they're even more resilient to certain types of pest and disease as well. So I think that's really the way in which we go about it. But again, that's just our internal reporting. We never, unless certain companies have targets. So there is one company that has, pledged to reduce a certain level of nitrogen emissions, but a lot of them don't have climate related targets, and even their sustainability reporting is quite limited. And so those are so the climate aspect of it is something that we speak of amongst ourselves, but we mostly just speak in terms of business incentives when we speak to the private sector.
That's really interesting, isn't it? There was a follow-up question from Mallory about whether there's been discussion about how improvements in soil health might actually reduce farmers' dependence on fertilizers and perhaps therefore influence or undermine the business model. Is that a conversation that you've had?
Well, I mean, I think because previously the government also tried to do a chemical fertilizer ban, and we went organic only, and we saw the impacts of that because in order to ensure that we have a certain level of production for food security, it's impossible at this stage to go without fertilizer. It's not, I mean, yes, it's also because there's already so much soil degradation, but it's also because of the types of seeds and varieties that we're using that they're quite dependent on certain levels of nutrients, which are not naturally found. So there is a lot of dependence on chemical fertilizer that I don't see going away anytime soon. But what we can do is be more efficient with the types of fertilizer used and ensure that they're not doing more harm than good.
Thank you. Let's Nimesha, there are some questions about tourism, but let's just stay on the agriculture one for now, since we've got Nadhia in full flow. So there was a question about from Samadi Natur about the just specifically, how did you incentivize retailers to get involved in using these different products and changing their business practices? What were the specific kind of incentives or mechanisms that you applied?
Right. So some of the things we've done is we've supported with so retailer onboarding mechanisms. So we give them retailer boards and things. And there's some where we give them, when I say we mean the partner provides them with cash rebates, and as well as if they reach certain targets, they get certain non-financial benefits, so certain gifts. We've done a tiered system with different types of products that they would get, and that has been very successful. We've also done transport waivers. So a lot of the time, retailers are the ones who bear the cost of the transport of the product. So we've removed the transport waiver in order for them to incentivize them to stock the product for the first time. So essentially, you only need to do this once or twice, because if the product is effective and there is good work being done on the farmer engagement side of things to increase farmer demand, then the product moves on its own. And so then after that, you don't really need to incentivize the retailer anymore, because they would definitely want to stock a product that is moving well and that where there's a good farmer demand for. So that's one aspect of it. And we also incentivize sales staff from the different companies that we're working with to reach a wider range of retailers, to increase the impact with the existing retailers, but also by bringing in new retailers. So we give them sales targets and incentives for reaching those targets as well.
Great. Okay. So look, just to sort of wrap up maybe for now on the fertilizer angle. So there's a question from my colleague Mike Klassen, which is, prior to MDF having an explicit mandate on climate from the Australians, from DFAT, how did your team assess fertilizer as a sector, and did that change when you added the climate lens? So did that lead to the program sort of pivoting its priorities sectorally?
Well, we had a bit of an evolution in our agriculture portfolio. So MDF initially started off as a tourism program here, and then we diversified into agriculture, but as a way of supporting tourism. So we focused on certain supply chains like organic herbs and spices and specialty coffee that supplement the tourism sector. But then we saw a lot of opportunity within that, and we learned a lot from working in that we scaled it up towards other high value crops where we mostly worked on sourcing and processing models. And then we also pivoted to agri-tech because we saw a lot of demand in terms of farmer management systems and all that. So for a lot of time, that's all we were working in, and it was supplemented with information and inputs as part of like activities as in those interventions. But then with changes in the economy, there were multiple shocks to the economy over a number of years, and that changed private sector risk appetite. So they weren't as interested in agri-tech for some time. They were really in survival mode. And so that made us rethink our strategy a bit, and we want to identify opportunities within agriculture where we could have maximum impact. And so that's when we pivoted towards agricultural inputs. And within that, we saw that fertilizer was a large issue in terms of productivity. So it wasn't essentially mainly because of climate change, as in not mainly because of our climate objectives, but more because that was the requirement at the time of the sector, because productivity was seriously being hampered by climate change. And the solutions for it that we could see and especially the ones that were more scalable and the ones that had more potential for reach and impact were of the nature that was also helped with climate adaptation as well as mitigation, if that makes sense. So it wasn't because we wanted to see what we can do to work on climate change and then we just identified this, but because this was something that naturally came up as a priority for the sector, which was also being impacted by climate risks.
Yeah, okay. Good. All right. Thank you so much, Nadhia, and appreciate your you're taking the strain here. Let's move it across and look at the tourism sector, Nimesha. I'm going to start with a question from Dan Nippard. Would you say a little bit about the economic and social sustainability gains for the project's target groups, if possible? I understood that there's been a great deal of investment in low carbon services and abatement or reduction that's been catalyzed, but what about more or better employment related impacts for workers, producers and communities?
Yeah, sure, Mike. So in terms of workers or employment creation, that's an area that we have covered through our interventions as well. So when it comes to developing carbon frameworks, developing manifestos for businesses to go ahead and do carbon calculations, upskilling of their labor is critical. And sometimes also recruiting and completely training them for a highly technical role. So with our interventions, current monitoring, we've only had about 4 to 5 interventions so far, and we've been able to train people in sustainability. For about 200 people were trained and 6 new green jobs were created. So the employment aspect is something that we are closely monitoring, and what the individuals in the tourism industry says is that it's really interesting for them to know that they can really grow a career in sustainability. I know probably in the West it's really common, but in Sri Lanka, given the multiple economic shocks, this is an area that is new, especially to the tourism sector. So having those opportunities, and for these roles, because these roles are mainly towards desk roles, I would say, when it comes to like very technical roles. So we've also been able to give these roles to women, because there's a lot of resistance in Sri Lanka when it comes to women in tourism, because there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of culture and different views on how women can really join the trade. So these type of jobs have given opportunities to women, and it doesn't really stop there. I think when you curate a sustainable tour, you of course have to think of your sourcing. So now our hotels and our tour providers are able to source from close by to where they're traveling. So that's one of the goals that we cover in slow tourism. So there are vendors that have just kind of started earning revenue from just supplying some fruits to the hotel that is maybe like 1 to 2 kilometers in from the hotel. So there have been a sourcing aspect where a lot of vendors have got new business. And at the same time, a lot of home-based experiences are starting to grow. So for instance, this traveler who is spending more on slow tourism, they are not interested in these Instagrammable kind of locations. They really want to feel what the locals feel. So there are culinary sessions that happen in people's houses, and also there are like dancing teachers who are integrating visitors to come and experience local dance. So there's a lot in terms of the sourcing aspect, and also in terms of the employment aspect that's happening.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. Yeah, I'm just trying to see. I'm afraid that all the questions are really about fertilizers and agriculture. But let's step back a little bit. Actually, maybe Angus, there's a question that you can address from my colleague Mike, about the sort of insights that have arisen from putting climate change at the front of your strategy as an organization, as a program, especially in a large multi-country program like MDF. What are some of the tactics you've tried for building skills, building confidence, and hiring the right people in order to bring the necessary sort of climate expertise into your teams?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's an interesting question. Try and sum up last 3 years, but I think the like when I first joined the program, I would say there was definitely a lot of reticence from the teams about engaging with this subject. Possibly, I heard from others similar to the way that the gender and social inclusion was added. People didn't really know how to speak to businesses about it. They weren't kind of confident, and they then felt like they would go into a meeting and ask about climate change adaptation or mitigation and kind of not get a great response from their partners. So I think the thing, like really what we spoke about today was about kind of grounding the teams in an understanding of what climate change risk looks like for their market system. So I kind of went and did what we called a climate audit of the program, and I went and met with every sector team and talked about, kind of downscaling climate risk. So thinking about climate projections at a high level, and the race to net zero is one thing, but what does that mean for an agribusiness in Sri Lanka or an outsourcing business in Fiji? So I think that was probably the main thing. There was definitely some other lessons along the way and other tactics we used. I definitely did have colleagues like Nadhia and Nimesha leading the charge while I wasn't there as part of a climate change working group that I ran. We're lucky at MDF that we're able to kind of share lessons from multiple country contexts. So we've done a monthly kind of similar to this grab the mic session where the country teams will come and share an intervention or a piece of analysis that they've done. We changed the concept note templates. We changed portfolio review structures to better focus on that. So I think probably a shout out to the leadership in MDF that really kind of took this seriously, and DFAT that kind of pushed us to keep doing more as well. So yeah, I think that was really important, that it got fed into country directors' KPIs and things like that, which meant that they would take my meetings. So yeah, I'll stop there, I think.
Well, thanks, Angus. I mean, while you were talking there, Jane Gisson was just contact asked a question which you may have already answered in a way, but how has MDF selected where the highest sort of mitigation or adaptation potentials are, and has that influenced the interventions and partnerships you're seeking?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've kind of had a two stroke. We had a very strong existing portfolio. In agriculture, it was kind of an emerging portfolio in Sri Lanka, but an existing portfolio in tourism before this climate objective got added. So we had to kind of both focus on integration, which into our existing work. So trying to find where the opportunities were, and I think we also looked at what existing work we could promote further to expand some of the impact from it. So I think Nadhia spoke about some of the work we're doing on sourcing and processing that included inputs, and then we've been able to kind of grow and scale that impact because of obviously some changes in the market, but also it perhaps became a product selection and information focus for us in terms of kind of scaling that. I think in small island developing states that Sri Lanka maybe isn't one, but all of the rest of the markets we work in are, and there aren't a lot of opportunities for mitigation, I would say. So I think energy has been a focus. It's I think we prioritize based on market opportunity, government policy, and maybe DFAT priority as well. Maybe that's probably the simplest way to answer that. But
Thank you. I wanted to take an opportunity. We've only got a few minutes left, so we're going to have to sort of wrap this up. I wanted to take a couple of opportunities to, I think the speakers are going to answer a couple of questions. They're going to type some answers to some of the remaining questions. But one thing I wanted to flag up, or ask my colleague Mike to flag up, is a new case study about the work in Sri Lanka, which has just been published. Mike, are you able to talk?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me, Mike?
We can hear you. Yeah, go ahead. So this is Mike Klassen, my colleague from the Beam Exchange.
Yeah, so I shared a link in the chat maybe about 15 minutes ago. This is as hot off the press as it gets. Yeah, we had a few formatting things that literally changed within the last hour. So it's just it's a short case study. I mean, nothing's a substitute for having Nadia live, bringing it to life. But I think it's an attempt to capture like some of the underlying strategy, some of the kind of the risks and the incentives and the approach. And this is the first in a series of at least 6 that will come out over the next few months. The case study is kind of from Swiss Contact's point of view, but of course featuring MDF, which is a joint program. And yeah, I mean, I think this case study focuses on agriculture. The ones that are to come mostly are outside of agriculture, and I think it's a really nice bridging point for kind of the MSD field, where over the past few years we've invested in guidelines and some of the case studies that are up on Beam Exchange around greening MSD in agriculture. But what was great about today's webinar, I thought, is having those two contrasting examples and seeing how different the incentives are in tourism, kind of how that the potential for a kind of market opportunity in the mitigation space, how you have to translate that through changing consumer demands. And I think some of the future cases, there is a case study on adaptation in winter tourism in Kosovo as a result of changing snowfall patterns. So I think look forward to those getting shared out over the months ahead. And yeah, I just wanted to close with congrats to the team. There's such great concrete examples of what this can look like. And thanks, Angus, also for sharing some of those lessons, because I think it takes a lot of work. It is yet another change management process. Like you said, this doesn't just happen overnight. It's about bringing the team along. It's changing processes, changing leadership incentives. And I think that's maybe the takeaway for the field is if you want to have interventions like these, then there's a whole backstory to what that takes from the leadership of the project, from an expertise, and from the donor too. I think we don't want to underestimate the role that requiring this from the funder side kind of lays down the gauntlet for projects. And I think for any donors that are listening, that's good inspiration. So thanks so much. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mike. And that has actually kind of wrapped things up rather nicely, I think. We are out of time, I'm afraid. I hope everyone got their questions answered, but there will be, we will share the recording of the event. We will share the slides, and if you want to contact any of these speakers, I'm sure you can reach out more to chat with them one-to-one about any further questions you have. So yeah, I'll just repeat what Mike said. Thank you, Angus, Nadhia, and Nimesha. That was a really great webinar, really nice, tangible, specific, concrete examples about what climate means in the MSD world, and you've done a great job. It's been a pleasure.